And now, all the way from Germany through the streets of gay Paris, Miss Lily Weiss.
Lily is maybe one of the early versions of what they call now a jukebox musical. So there's all this breadth of work and depth of content from one artist, Kurt Weill. And through a story that I wanted to tell, I had this wealth of material at my disposal. And what was fun, interesting, and gave me a bit of an edge was that he had a German period, a French period, and an American period. So it led to my storytelling, and the textures in his music changed based on where he was and who he was writing for. As a commercial artist that he became, that totally makes sense. He started out as a political activist storyteller, and he turned into a commercial Broadway artist. But he never lost what made him interesting, which is what keeps my focus in the whole breadth of his work. But it's truly a jukebox musical, if you must categorize it, aside from the fact that it is a melodrama, because most jukebox musicals are not, shall we say, so serious. But this one has levity. It has hope. It has strength of character. And it hopefully inspires.
You gentlemen can wipe out the smile from your face. Every building in town sounds for like what? This whole stinking place, way down to the ground. The Grace Cheap Hotel, standing on Secret Sound. And you yell, why the hell spare that one? And you yell, why the hell spare that one? All the night through, and then boys, what you do? And you wonder who's that person is up there. And you see me stepping out into the morning, looking nice with a ribbon in my hair.
One of the things I wanted to do when I was originally thinking of creating this story around this fictional character was to tell a new kind of Holocaust story. Holocaust stories are stories I grew up with. We all probably grew up with some form of them. In that idea that so we never forget, right? We need to learn from the history so the history doesn't repeat itself. But all these stories, in my experience, were very male dominated. It was a rinse and repeat of a man seeing his wife and child go off on one train and he was on another. And then that story is told from his point of view. What about the hundreds of thousands of LGBTQIA people who were targeted by the Nazis? What about the people with disabilities? What about the gypsies? What about the individuals who had no family to remember them? And it's something as Jews we pray for all the time. Those who don't have people to remember them, it's a part of our culture and a part of our process. But in theater, I was just feeling like there was an empty spot. And I wanted to tell a woman's story from a woman's point of view that deals not that the Holocaust it's just something behind the scenes, as it were. It's something that was going on and was obviously affecting her, but it's not the focal point of the story. The focal point of the story is a story about this person, a whole person who happens to be female, who happens to be part of the LGBTQIA community, who also happens to be Jewish, but is non-religious. She's working in the underground cabarets that we all now know were very popular in the 20s and 30s, and where in Germany particularly there was sexual fluidity that was just everywhere. It was in the art, it was in the culture, it was in life. Berlin was flaming in a beautifully artistic way. And Hitler came in and stomped out all of that and made everyone feel in those communities unsafe. But it's the backdrop of what this one person was going through, because there is still domestic violence. There's still poverty, which is debilitating. And these are the stories I just wanted to sort of bring together in a circumstance that we all know about. I gave Lily her name because I wanted her to bloom. Lilies are flowers. They can grow without much sun. They are resilient. I have one. Every time she looks sad, I give her a little water. She perks right back up. I can move her around in darkness and in light, and she'll still thrive. I wanted to give her her last name. That was a color of purity. Weiss. Weiss in American. She's a white lily. She's a blank slate. She's a resilient human being. And I wanted her name to feel Jewish, but obviously be some sort of truncated version of a longer name, so that she could be semi-generic and yet still very clearly of Jewish descent, because the fact that she's Jewish is not a focal point of the story. It is part of who she is. It is not who she is. What some people may not know is there was also a workshop of this piece at the Duplex in New York City in the early 2000s, probably sometime around 2004, maybe even 2003. In this production, well, I can barely call it a production, but it was me getting together with some friends, trying to see if my idea was really something or if it was nothing and I should move on. We sang to packed houses in the Duplex, which was a cabaret haven and hangout for maybe even a century, right around the corner from Stonewall. And that's when we got our feet wet thinking this might actually be a thing. That team just consisted of my close friends, Ray, as ever, behind the keys and as the music director and playing Joe, and my friend Heather Gillis, my best friend since our freshman year in college, who directed. And we really just figured out, slowly but surely, that the story there might actually be something we could run with. And we had excellent, excellent feedback from that audience of drunk people who were sitting at cafe tables and enjoying the music and participating, whether we liked it or not. But it was an entertaining environment for all. But it was quite like the scenes in Berlin that Lily herself might have been singing for in the early 30s before the war. So it was a really adventurous time, and it inspired us to think, wow, this is something. And after that process, I gathered up our team and we headed for off-Broadway. It's good to dream big. Being someone who came from theater and only wound up in opera because her voice was too loud, I've always been interested in what it is, this whole thing called performance. I never fully felt at home in any prescribed genre, and I've always wanted to find my own way to tell a story. And I've wanted to sing my way through telling that story, to be clear. Lily was my first opportunity to try out producing. I didn't even know the word when I started working on Lily. But as I'm gathering a team and I'm writing schedules, I'm like, oh, I guess this is that thing called producing-ish. I mean, not in the Hollywood sense, because all you have to do in Hollywood to be a producer is have a ton of money. That's not how it works in theater, though. I don't know if any of y'all know that. Theater is where you go when you don't care about money and you just want to write stories and semi-employ your friends. But that said, learning how to produce, I don't know that many people go into their first production knowing how to produce. I was winging it and asking for help every step of the way. Thankfully, I knew a lot of great people, and I've heard that my novice approach was actually the keenest one of my decisions, which was to make sure you hire your friends or people who you know are better than you. If you hire a team that is smarter, more talented, and better than you, you're pretty much guaranteed to have some help and to have this thing work. And I did that. I mean, I've never felt so supported in a project in my life, which is shocking because it was mine. And it's always hard to step into the room, especially as a young female, and to say, this is mine. Let's do it my way and let's do it now. But I had a team who was willing to buy in and join me on this journey. And they all had so much freaking talent that I felt safe to try this endeavor for the first time. And I felt safe enough to make mistakes. And I made some really big ones. But I had a team around me who would hold me accountable and who would forgive me my mistakes as long as I fixed them. And I did. And here we are. Fast forward many, many years, and I went to Cal Arts to get my MFA. And I went through the voice department so I could teach there while I did it. But I studied producing because I loved it. And it started a bug in me. And so far, I'm only producing my own work, Carmen Shadow of My Shadow, this, and my Beyond Carmen projects. But who knows what the future has in store? I like producing. And Lily gave me the bug to think I could actually do it. And I went further and started studying it after that. So. It's interesting to follow someone's career. If you think about famous actors that you've watched over decades of their performing, you get to watch them mature. You get to watch them age like cheese or like wine, depending what's your jam. I don't know. I don't know your life. But one of the things I remember thinking about Lily, which is funny to think that I was thinking of it, was that I remember thinking when I created her, I was like, I can play her at any age. And how interesting it would be that I could play her then in my 20s, I think, maybe my late 20s, early 30s, and I can play her now as I've reached 40. It's still viable. It's not like some weird ingenue, Band of Butterfly is 15 and she's really 65, which can be troubling for some people. But this is truly just the story of a woman in her journey, and she could be any age. What I find interesting as I'm digging into these texts and to this story that I created when I was a much younger person with a lot less life experience is that she had experienced things in this story Lily had that I had read about, that I had known about anecdotally. Giving myself some space and some time to live through things, I get to come back to this piece with a little bit more life behind me. And some things resonate differently. And I'm curious to see how this plays out in that blank slate called a stage. There's something so magical about that fourth wall that doesn't exist, right? This cube that I come to you in that is missing that one final piece that cuts us off usually, but this one's open, right? So what happens in that blank space now that time has passed? Political things have occurred. Life has occurred. Pandemics have occurred. Tragedies have occurred. And now what do we create with this with the same story? But all of us have lived more life. I guess we'll all have to find out.
He's a good man. He's a rich man. Wears a fine cravat. Smokes a cigar. And if he's bad, he treats me like a lady. Then I shall tell him sorry. Say the pie can go cold and dry, never relax or go too far. Oh, how the sun goes shining on. Keep the little roads cruising on and on. I stay perpendicular. Oh, you can't just let a man walk over you. Cold and dignified is what you are. Such a hold on, things can happen. So simply say, but sweetly, sorry.
And now, all the way from Germany through the streets of gay Paris, Miss Lily Weiss.
Tell me, is love still a popular suggestion? Or merely I'm